Good evening, everyone. My name is Stan Chambers Jr. I am the Polaris of the Triangle Iotas, and I would like to welcome all of you to the latest conversation in our law enforcement series, When to Call the Police. Now, as you guys know, there's been a number of incidents around the country between residents and law enforcement. I'm not going to get into those details, but they've made national news. And so while the question sounds simple, when you call police, there are some situations that are obvious, vehicle accidents, shootings, stabbings. There's some pretty clear cut situations where you might want to call a police officer, but there are some situations where it's pretty gray and where a law enforcement officer may not be the best option for your particular situation. And so we're going to talk about it tonight. And before we introduce our esteemed guests, again, this is part of our law enforcement series. We have a conversation every month. And the idea behind this series is to help bridge the gap so that officers understand what community members are thinking and going through, and vice versa. And so the idea here, again, is for us to build bridges. And especially with everything that's been going on within the past year or so, we could definitely use some bridge building. So for that, I would like to turn this discussion to our guests and just have them briefly introduce themselves.
Dale Jackson, been a police officer about 7 years, and our LB down here, Dan.
Hello, everybody. I've been a police officer for about 2 years now in the state of North Carolina. I would like to introduce Brother Richard Gamble. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, brother.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Richard Gamble, and I'm a mental health clinician in Wake County. Been a social worker for about 7 years now.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. And so we have two police officers and a social worker here for this conversation. Now, this is, again, a conversation. This is not necessarily a lecture. So if you guys can say hello in the comments, post your questions in the comments, and I will share your questions with our panel here. And so let's start with the two officers. If you can talk about sort of some situations you guys have come across where you felt like maybe you weren't the best person to address the situation at hand.
Yeah, I've been to a couple calls where there was really like no law enforcement presence required, such as like I've been called to houses at night where their juveniles or their young teenagers' parents possibly might be disrespecting the parent. And I advised the parent, I was like, hey, I understand that you felt that you might have needed the police, but this is not a police matter. There were no laws broken. And I advised them, well, hey, I can't really parent for you to raise your child due to the disrespect that he's giving you. The best thing I could offer them is a bunch of tips on how to possibly parent better or something like that. But other than that, law enforcement presence wasn't required at that address.
We can go from a spectrum of us being called from people's houses, no lies, the call where the boyfriend called in because his girlfriend wanted sex again, and he was upset because she wanted too much, to where people are getting stabbed or shot. But the most common ones are, yes, like you said, where kids are disrespecting their parents or don't want to go to school or are kicking a seat and whatnot, and they call us after they pull over and they call the cops. A lot of people want us to scare their kids and put them in the back of our car or put handcuffs on them, and you shouldn't do that, especially kids. That just puts unnecessary trauma on the kids. One of the most recent one that I called for was, let's put it as mental health crisis. A lot of mental health crisis calls we don't need to go to unless it becomes where you think they're going to get violent or they are violent. So you have people call us for mental health crisis where somebody's just pulling their hair out and they need to go to the hospital and they're underage. When they're underage, the parent, they have all right to put the kid in the car and have them committed. Where we come, we can only commit them if it's emergency. Emergency meaning they're insuring themselves or somebody else, and they have to have means to do that, to take out whatever action they are going to take out, either hurt themselves or saying they're going to kill themselves. They have to have a plan as well. So there's a lot of stuff that plays into mental health. Anyone comes to mind for you at all, Dan?
Yeah. And when he means like that, coming to mental health, I had a call the other day where a lady, EMS requested PD emergency traffic or a lady not cooperating with them. And so when I get there, I get out my car and one of the EMTs is meeting me outside the ambulance. And I'm like, where are they at? And they told me that the lady jumped out the ambulance and started walking away. And so I start walking out there. I'm trying to calm her down. Well, when I get closer, I notice that she has a pipe in her hand and she was trying to hit the EMTs. And so what I told her was, I told the EMTs, I was like, hey, get at it, get away from her and let me talk to her. So in the process of me talking to her, I'm explaining to her, I'm like, hey, I'm just trying to get her calmed down. So I asked her name and everything. She told me her name and I asked her what the problem was. And she said that she didn't want to go to the hospital. She was fine, but clearly she wasn't. She wasn't in the right state of mind. She didn't know where she was at. She was calling us names that's not her names. She didn't know who the president was at the time or anything like that. And she was going through a mental health crisis. It got to the point where she tried to hit me with the pipe, and I grabbed it from her, and we tussled over it for a little bit, and I grabbed her, and without force, I put her hands in front of her, and we had to take her into custody, and have the EMTs take her to the hospital. They had to sedate her, and so that was a situation where they needed the police because she was a harm to herself and others.
So it sounds like the situations that you two come across revolve around either children or somebody is having some sort of mental health crisis, whatever that is. And so, Richard, if you can jump in for a minute. And so, in these type of situations, for example, what can a parent do if their child is being disrespectful, or if somebody's seeing someone going through like a mental health crisis? Like, what are their options for in those type of situations?
So like those brothers who said, when clients are a threat to themselves or other, that's when you will call the police. But in other situations, whether they're just having like manic episodes or psychotic episodes, if you were to call the police, you would request a CIT officer, which is a crisis intervention officer. And they're pretty much trained in mental health to kind of like de-escalate a situation.
Now, with CIT officers, my understanding is not every area has a CIT officer. I know you imagine like places like Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte, your bigger metro areas would have those type of officers. But say if you're in, I don't know, Wilson, for example, or Kernersville, they might not have that type of resource. And so, for you, Rich, what other options would people have? And then before you answer, for those who are listening, please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the comments. I think I see one question already, so we'll get to that in a minute. But again, this is interactive, so please post your questions in the comments. So, Rich.
I would just say from my experience, communicating with them, a lot of times people just want to be heard. You can also figure out like what calms them down, what are their coping skills, or what are some things that would de-escalate them in situations like that. Even if they are manic, you don't want to feed into their delusions or hallucinations, but again, like people just want to be heard.
Right. And so as well, let me ask this question. So Saya asked this question, and this is for brothers Jackson and Tyler. What type of mental health crisis training, guidance, techniques, response options, and resources are given to law enforcement officers so that these said situations may be resolved in as constructive, safe, and humane a manner as possible?
So I can say it this way. All the training that you can ever ask for is offered online, basically through the Justice Academy. Now, I can't say that every department pushes training on everybody, but as far as CIT, I'm actually CIT trained. I started in Raleigh, where in academy, right before I got out of the academy, everybody was trained in that 2-week course. Is it 2 weeks? I believe it was 2 weeks course. And when I came to Gastonia, when I said CIT, I really haven't heard any other officer talk about it. So I think I'm the only one right now that is certified CIT. There might be more, don't know, but I just seen a recent email about that. But as far as training is always offered through Justice Academy. You have the ones that are online and you have the ones that are in person. You just got to apply for them.
So real quick, David, before you answer, with CIT, if you can get a little bit into what goes into CIT training, exactly, like so what it is and what does it involve.
So CIT is Crisis Intervention Training, what it stands for. And the course, it basically dumbs down and it explains to officers why certain actions may be taken against certain people, or what people may be doing, may be considered criminal, but it's not criminal, it's more mental. It kind of shows you the realm of mental health, and it kind of just, we get exposed to videos of different, I would say, different, what's the word for it?
Situation?
No, that's different situations.
Different
Yeah,
emphasis.
as far as like basically people with PTSD, manic, depression, we get kind of exposed to all that stuff before we actually get on the street, and then we actually experience it on the street. And as far as CIT training, that's basically what it is. It basically comes a crash course in mental health and how to talk to them, de-escalate, use their words, things to not do, actions to not take, and how to kind of adjust your tactics going around and helping the actual person that's having a crisis.
Okay. Dan, anything you'd like to add to that regarding CIT?
I'm not CIT trained, so I'm going to a course soon with my department, but I'm not CIT. So, nothing officially to add, but I will say it does help when, as Brother Gamble said and Brother Jackson said, to not fall into their delusions, but definitely like hear them out, because that's basically what they want to hear, is just to be heard out. That's all.
We do have another question. How does mental health crisis training differ from, I think it's from one department to another? I.e. from, so like I mentioned earlier, from a bigger city to a more like smaller rural area. Like, is there basically, is CIT training different in Raleigh versus Mebane, for example?
It should be standardized from what I believe. However, the teachers always teach a little different angle on it. It really depends on what the teacher has been through. Honestly, in Raleigh, we had an officer who basically his son suffered from illness, and he's dealt with a lot on the streets in his past. He was basically a real seasoned officer, so he had a lot of knowledge. But let's say if you get an officer who's been on the street for like 3 years and became certified and hasn't really been through different situations, that person training may not be as detailed, or you may not get as much knowledge from that person.
Right. And we have another question. Can only officers receive CIT training, or can the public receive that training as well somewhere?
I believe the public should be able to get some kind of information, if not the whole training. But police officers are not the only ones. EMTs, medics, they get CIT trained as well.
So awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. So let me ask you guys this, and because while basically this conversation is centered around, again, children not listening to parents and people who clearly are going through something at the moment, what are some other, like, I guess let's play like, okay, here's when you should call the police, here's when you maybe want to call the police, depending on sort of certain circumstances, and when you really shouldn't call the police. And I would like for each of you gentlemen to sort of walk us through 3 examples of within those parameters.
You want to do one each, or go ahead and do 3?
You can do all 3.
Another one would be basically evictions. That's probably a big one. If the person has, in North Carolina, verbal is the same thing as written, from what I was told, and it's basically out there. Now, if you want to evict somebody, you need to go ahead and go to the courthouse. You shouldn't call us because you're going to kick them out the house. You cannot do that. Go ahead and get your eviction notice, get the sheriff department to serve it, and then they're out. Now, as far as somebody who is a guest in your house, you do not have to evict them. And if they're not willing to leave, then you can call us at that point in time. But that's one of the biggest things also as well, eviction versus being a guest. And being a guest is somebody you're invited to stay with you for a couple of days, and you don't have no verbal agreement for paying rent. Mail does not count, and being there for a year doesn't count. You can be there for a year and be a guest. Same thing with adult children's. They basically are a guest. They're not tenant unless you have a verbal agreement or a written agreement for him to stay there or her.
And just a quick point of clarification: when we talk about adult, we're talking about over 18, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You guys can go ahead. I gotta think of another one.
I got you. So the situation that I've had, the three, if there's a weapon involved and someone doesn't want to leave the house, definitely call the police for the safety of you and the other people. But a lot of times people, they do calls, like you said, for the eviction part. You have 30 days to evict someone in the state of North Carolina. So after you call us and the sheriff department serves them, they have 30 days to vacate the premises. That's in the North Carolina general statute. Also, for dealing with kids and stuff, if they're 16 or 14, I had this a lot. His parents like, hey, he's disrespectful. I don't want him in my house. I'm like, we can't throw your child out of your house. That's child neglect. You can't do that. Some people are like, I'll let him run away. I don't want to put my hands on him. You know, when the kids run away, we bring them back to the house. You can't say, I don't want this kid in my house. You can't do that. You know, that's child neglect again. So those are situations that I've had. Parents try to get their children out of the house when they become rude to them. We can't say, hey, you can't just kick your kid out. That's against the law. So that's the situation that I've had happen to me. And that's about it. That's what I've encountered so far.
So Richard, for you, sort of situations you've been involved in where yes, police, maybe police, and no police.
I would say with yes police, anytime a client is a threat to myself or themselves, I don't think I have situations where I would have to call the police, but I have had colleagues where police had to be involved because either they were threatening the last, had a plan or a for homicide or suicide in those situations. I've had arrested in the past for multiple things that they shouldn't have, and a lot of times maybe they just need to be in inpatient psychiatric hospital because maybe they're not stable on medications or just may have just been out on the streets and somebody just called the police because they was disturbing the peace or anything like that.
It is hot. It is hot.
So there is a here. It's another question. So as law enforcement officers, I'm reading the question here. If you receive CIT and then additional certifications, training, or licensures in mental health / counseling outside of your job, does your department make you a designated on-call officer for mental health calls?
My department, no. There are departments who are now gearing up and getting actual units for that specific call. So if anything comes out where it's mental health, those officers are going. But my department, no. Now, when I'm working and it's something like that going on, especially in my zone, I'm most likely the first officer to go to that call.
For our department, it depends on the situation because we do have CIT trained officers at my department as well. We do not have an on-call officer for that, for those mental health crisis situations. So we play it ear by ear, but if it's something that's heavily like we need a CIT officer, we'll get one. But do not have a policy in effect for calling a CIT officer to come to the call.
Would it be fair to say that just naturally there's typically at least one CIT officer on shift somewhere in the city?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said earlier, most of the bigger cities, there are CRT officers, so there's going to be a lot of them on shift, or at least one a shift. But on smaller departments, it's very rare. It's getting to the point now where people are getting more and more certified. So it should be more on the streets now.
So let me ask you guys this, because, and this is for Rich as well, since we sort of revolved around this a lot. How much of your time is spent dealing with um, mental health situations, or in Richard's case, clients where they have a diagnosed mental health condition?
Quite a few times. Quite a few.
90 is what I do for a living.
I would say over half the calls are more likely either mental or drugs, which end up turning to being a mental crisis, from withdrawals or just from a drug that has triggered an illness.
I mean, it's like we say, Sam, like, we're dealing with people that, and Brother Doe can agree with me, and Brother Rich can agree as well. We're dealing with people at the worst time in their life. We're dealing with people on the worst days of their life. And 90% of the time, some of those people are actually having a mental health crisis over half the time. I've dealt with a couple calls that turn into a mental health crisis with the person not understanding mentally what we're talking to them about. So yeah, we're dealing with people on the worst day of their life, and half of them are having a mental health crisis when it's that day.
So when say somebody's at home with their child, their significant other, whatever, and there seems to be a situation brewing that can escalate quickly. What can people do to de-escalate the situation as much as possible, to where maybe someone like Richard could come out instead of someone like Officer Dell, Officer Dan?
So for me, it may sound a little weird as far as people hallucinating. I kind of when I get there, if they're not listening to me, I would agree with what they're saying, and then they start paying attention to what I'm saying. So I'm able to talk to them, talk them down on what's going on, and actually get them away from what's going on. So that's one of the biggest things. You want to basically get them away from anything that can hurt them or hurt you. And as far as that, really, that's the biggest thing, is get them away from it. Talk to them enough where you can get them to understand what you're saying, and get them away from anything that can hurt you or hurt themselves.
Be kind and compassionate to them. They're still a human being. Although they're going through something, you want someone to treat you, if you had the same situation, you want someone to treat you with the fairness, dignity, and the respect that you're trying to treat them with. So
You can also ask them, like, where's their comfort zone? A lot of people have certain either family or friends or that natural support that they can talk to whenever they are like having a bad day or having an episode that can calm them down. And then also, Google is your best friend. I can't speak for any of the smaller counties, but with bigger counties like Wake County and Durham, there you can also look up behavioral health services in the area. And a lot of times you have emergency lines.
So let me ask you this, Rich. So someone is going through, if like say someone there in their home is having a mental health crisis, can you just put them in your car and take them to Wake Med or whatever the nearest hospital is?
As far as like, if I'm, or you just talking about just kind of random situations?
Repeat that again. You went in and out.
Are you asking with a client, or are you just talking about in general?
I would say both.
With a client, I would assess the situation again to see if there's any safety risk. Sometimes because I have good rapport with my clients and I know that they're dealing with something, I would transport them to the nearest hospital. I guess in situations, just to, I guess, play it safe, you don't want to transport anybody because at any time you're putting yourself at risk on the road with other drivers. And so this moment, you can also Google mobile crisis numbers. And a lot of times those, I want to say those don't kind of go back to 911, but they're mental health specialists that can come out to the homes and de-escalate.
Gotcha. And again,
speaking of
go ahead.
mobile crisis, when you do call them, they don't call us unless you tell them that something's going to either happen, that you'll hurt yourself or hurt somebody in the house. So mobile crisis will come out without calling us. I've had that with both departments I work with.
And then even just with mobile crisis, for clients that do suffer from mental health issues or diagnosis, more than likely they probably are involved in some type of service. And so those mobile crisis numbers, they can link you back to providers. And so I've had where clients call mobile crisis, and we're contacted as a provider to make the kind of like check on the clients.
And so, again, just to make clear, if there's a weapon involved or if there's a threat, whether somebody's threatening to hurt themselves or somebody else, that's when you should dial 911. So just to, again, make that crystal clear, we do have, oh, go
Let me
ahead.
finish the last question. So as far as putting them in the car and driving them off, yes, don't recommend it unless you know what kind of state of mind they're in. If you have two people with you, then that's even better. You can have somebody right beside them in the back seat. However, what you can do is have one person stay with that person going through the crisis, and have another family member, a friend, or neighbor, whoever witnessed what's going on, send them to the magistrate, explain to the magistrate what's going on, whether they're a danger to themselves or somebody else, and they will issue IVC paperwork. And if you cannot get them in a car or they're very combative, whatnot, at that point in time, then the IVC basically gives us leeway to go ahead and take them, put them on the EMS truck, and take them to the hospital. And if they can't ride with the EMS appropriately, then we would take them to the hospital. But that's kind of all IVC, involuntary commitment.
And just to be clear, for those who don't know or where a magistrate is typically at your county jail. And so the way North Carolina works, if you're arrested, you would typically go before the magistrate, and the magistrate is essentially a judge, and they would set your bail and go from there. And so again, magistrates in North Carolina, they are typically at wherever your county jail is. There's typically a magistrate there.
And let me clarify that as well. As like if you call police ahead of time and they're not a danger to themselves or somebody else, we can't do anything at all. We can't put them in a car. We can't put them in that truck unless they say they want to go. So unless that paperwork is in hand, we can't do anything at all to help them.
Right. So we do have some more questions. And again, thank you everyone for your questions. Keep them coming in the comments. And so this question is for Brother Gamble. Do you find that it is a good asset for all professions that work within the public, especially legal, judicial, in addition to law enforcement, to have a good understanding of mental health illnesses or how to recognize the signs of an individual who may be in crisis?
Repeat the first part of the question.
Let me see if I can paraphrase. Basically, if you work at a job where you're dealing with the public, so like law enforcement, bail bondsmen, probation, parole, prosecutors, things like that. Is it good to have a basic understanding of recognizing the signs of someone who may be in a mental health crisis?
I would say yes. And even in today's times, you see a lot of people speaking out about mental health, because a lot of people are dealing with mental health issues. So I would definitely say, yeah, a lot of people that work in the public, you can, just for example, like the DMV, like they're not trained, or, they don't have that experiences with mental health, and saying that one wrong thing could trigger somebody.
Thank you for that. Another question for you. During this time of uncertainty in the pandemic, have you seen, and I would say this is for Dan and Dell as well, have either of you seen an increase in mental health crisis related calls where a client may be in an encounter with law enforcement versus non-related law enforcement calls? Did you get that?
Say the last part.
Okay. Let me read it again. And I'm deciphering the question here. So basically, for Brother Gamble, have you seen an increase in calls, mental health calls, where a client encounters law enforcement in some type of way or form? And then for the two officers, to remix that question a little bit, have you two seen an increase in mental health calls within the past that you guys have had to respond to within the past year?
So as the influx of calls, I haven't personally. We've been taking a usual amount of mental health crisis calls as we usually have, from what the other officers told me and the ones that I've worked with. I haven't really seen an influx of people that were being isolated due to the pandemic coming out and calling more and more and more. I haven't seen an increase in it.
Yeah, well, I haven't had that experience either.
I mean, as far as what I see when I do go on social media and what I've been going to as calls, I feel like people being stuck in the house have kind of realized what they do have and what they don't have, or it's been triggered a little more things as far as stress wise. So we've seen a little bit more stress related kind of going into mental health crisis as far as depression and like stuff like that. But other than that, no.
All right, thank you for that.
But I was gonna say what I can say with the pandemic, just being friends with a lot of different clinicians on social media. With the pandemic, a lot of clinicians have gone telehealth, and so even with people speaking out about mental health, they're able to do their therapy sessions from home instead of going to an office. And so I'm not sure if maybe that have helped with the reduce of calls.
And the good thing is I've noticed within the last year is that a lot of companies, different jobs are offering telehealth for free for a certain amount of visits, and then you have to pay, and then you still get a discount. So that's probably why it hasn't really spiked heavily, but yes.
And so that, and both of you bring up a very good point. Most companies do have that. I think it's typically called like E something P, and I should know this. It's I forgot what it's called. But basically, like you guys said, it's a program where your employer will cover a certain amount of sessions with a therapist, and these are discrete. Your boss doesn't know that you're you're seeing a therapist, and if you're not sure whether your job offers that, you can just talk to HR, to your HR department, and they'll be able to tell you. Most likely, they do have something like that, and I cannot believe the acronym skips me. So this question is for brothers Jackson and Tyler. There have been a rise in police encounters in situations with individuals who are autistic, and those situations have gone awry in most cases. Have either of you two encountered an autistic person, and how are law enforcement officers trained to recognize someone who might be autistic?
Well, I've encountered a lot of them, and what CIT actually helps with the training. But believe it or not, autistic kids are the smartest people alive. They just have a quirk that makes them react a certain way. You just have to find out what that is. And if you talk to them, they will tell you sometimes. You just have to get to them and talk to them.
The ones that I have encountered, I've been lucky to have an officer that is CIT trained with me. And also, from my experience, I have a friend who is autistic, a personal friend of mine. And he has also advised me, do not touch them, because that puts them in a state of panic. So try to talk to them, understand what they're going through. Do not touch them because they're going through a state of panic. And a lot of encounters have ended up with officers forcibly restraining them and hurting themselves or the person that they're trying to restrain. Because believe it or not, autistic people have really an insane amount of strength with the encounters. So I've been told not to touch them and just talk through the situation.
And I think there was a recent situation that made national news, I believe in Aurora, Colorado, where officers encountered someone, I believe he was autistic. My apologies if he wasn't, but I believe he was. And that person ended up being restrained and ended up Larry dying. And so, like Officer Dan said, like having that understanding is extremely, extremely important. Uh, so we have a comment followed by a question. Um, this is sort of like a big picture question, so I'll just read through this. So, New York Police Department and Newark, sorry, and by Newark, I imagine he means Newark, New Jersey, has implemented a form of community policing that involves officers actually engaging with the community through being a part of various events and programs. This has been successful there. I can tell you a quick side note. So a long time ago, I used to be a newspaper reporter where I covered during police department. And there was I forgot the name of the organization, but basically the organization was a hodgepodge of community leaders, um, aware residents, if you will, and the police, and they would get together monthly at a church and talk about sort of community issues and sort of how we can move forward as a community. So um, the person who ran it, her name was Marsha Owen, and so those programs have happened, do happen here in this area. And so the question is, do you believe such a model can be successful throughout the country? But let's focus a little bit more. Um, is there a program like that currently in your departments, respective departments? And if not, do you think something like that could work in your respective departments?
I think being engaged with the community, and being a part of those things is a great idea. You have to protect people. We have to understand people. To understand people, you have to engage with people.
We don't have one, but I'm pretty sure if you, like I said on a couple of episodes ago, if you go to your police department and talk to them and give them suggestions for engaging with the community, they won't shut that down. Especially in this time, I mean, we want to hear from you guys. We want to know what we need to do better or what we're lacking in and what the community needs that we don't see. So if you have any ideas, take it to your police department and run it across them.
And I would say that those type of efforts are usually start on the community level. And just real quick, back to the effort that I previously mentioned, at every meeting, there was the representative from the Durham Police Department was typically a captain. And so, you know, of course, it'd be nice to get the chief, but the chief is busy typically. So typically a captain, sometimes a lieutenant would show up at these meetings, and they were consistent, and they participated. So here's an interesting question. As law enforcement officers, how do you recognize if your colleague is in mental health distress? And if you recognize distress in a law enforcement officer colleague, do you say something or do you keep quiet? And how do you de-stress after a shift? Good question. Questions, rather.
How I personally de-stress from seeing the traumatic things that law enforcement officers see, because it is a traumatic job. I go work out. I definitely have an outlet. I work out. I go play basketball. Go fishing. You know, I have a positive outlet. Some people, they like to drink and stuff. That can also lead to bad things. So I try to have a positive outlet. I definitely like to go work out, de-stress, go on a run, clear my head from all the traumatic things that you see as a police officer. It is a really traumatic job. That is actually a really good question. Thank you very much for asking me. Really.
Now, as far as the stressing, that is not easy. When I first started, it took me probably about a year to kind of like shut it all down. Like literally when I get off, like into my shift and I'm home, I literally forget about the whole day. When I first started, everybody's asking me what happened today and want me to relive it. And that kind of doesn't take your mind off. It just puts your mind in that 24/7. So when I get home, I literally forget about all day. I take about 5 minutes to decompress, take a shower. I go downstairs, play with my daughter, talk to my wife, and put her to bed, and then I work out. working out, it really, that's the biggest stress reliever right there. Now, as far as seeing an officer in distress, while at work, while you're in a BLET, basic law enforcement training, before you become an officer, that's one of the blocks they teach you to actually look. And if you see anything off about an officer, that's something you need to speak up about, because somebody can lose their life if that officer's having a bad day. So that's something you really can't play with.
So with the first part of that question, so Dan, is there anything you would like to add to that? Or also, like how, and if you can say, how do you recognize if your colleague might potentially be distressed?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I've never had a colleague that was in distress, but if I did, I would definitely say something. As my brother said, someone is in distress. Someone can have a bad day. Someone can lose their life, and that's not what we're about. We're about preservation of life. So I wouldn't want someone to be hurt. So I would definitely say something to my sergeant or my captain immediately.
And so for you, Rich, how do you, you're dealing with clients, you're hearing, you may not be seeing all types of things, but you're definitely hearing all types of things. How do you de-stress?
And so for me, I like to sleep. The brothers said finding something positive to do, whether that be going to the gym or taking a nature trail walk or listening to music. Even as clinicians, like we also, as therapists, we find therapists that we can have that outlet with and communicate with, just kind of like debrief. And so it's all about finding something positive, something that you enjoy doing, something that could be a stress reliever for you.
Great. So again, you guys have been doing this. So post your comments and your questions in the comment section. Thank you for those who have done so. And so unless, usually when I say this, I usually get like 2 or 3 more questions. So to wrap up, and I say that thinking I'm going to get a question. If each of you can talk in a general sense, I know we kind of hit this earlier in our conversation, just an overall sense on when it's best to call law enforcement and sort of resources, where we talked a lot about mental health. And so if you think somebody is going through a mental health crisis, but they're not in a state where you think law enforcement is needed, or another example that we talked about, your kid's not listening to you. What do you do in that situation? And just sort of walk through when you should call police and when you shouldn't, but also where can people go to find resources?
I'll start with this. Parents, be a parent. I mean, you can discipline your kid. And that's, I think once we start doing that again, but doing it like, don't go overboard with it, but just discipline your kid the way you feel like it's appropriate, then we'll be fine. But when you don't set boundaries for your kids, then that's when you get calls about, oh, my kid is kicking the seat, or he won't go to school, or he won't get out the car, or he's trying to punch my seat, or he's hitting his dad, stuff like that. Once you set guidelines and rules and your kid falls or starts following those, that's majority of it. Mental health, kids underage, parents, you can take them to the hospital and get them committed because you are the parent and they are still underage. As far as anybody that is of age or friends, family members, or neighbors, if you witness anything that you feel like or heard somebody say something like about them taking their lives, you can go present that to the magistrate and explain to them what's going on, and you can get IVC paperwork, like we said. IVC paperwork is only good for 24 hours. So if it's not served within the 24 hours, you have to do another one. Some people start saying, oh, well, I've been committed 2 or 3 times and it's not working. Keep doing it. The more you do it, you end up finding somebody who will help or understand exactly what's going on instead of just letting it go in the wind. As far as domestics where there's no violence at all, somebody's taking my property. If you guys are married, what's his is yours, was hers is yours. It's all together. So until you guys get divorced and in court document said this is yours, it's mine, we can't do anything about that. Same thing as far as damaging property. If it's your property, you can go take out a charge yourself at the magistrates. Most of the magistrates you can take out yourself, and they give you a criminal summons, or you go to court, or you can sue that person civilly. Same thing as somebody's your neighbor. Neighbor damages your grass. Police don't need to go out there for that. Sue them civilly for that. Stuff, little things like that. If I said too much, we're good.
No, you're good. But in that vein, if your neighbor keys up your car, that's something different.
Yeah. Mostly $500 and below of damage. Anything 500 above, call a police officer.
Gotcha. So, Rich, you can chime in, please.
I'm gonna say one of the biggest things, I don't know, with the pandemic, a lot of people have been speaking about this, is just checking in with your family and friends. I think a lot of times we do take that for granted. Even going back to the question with your colleagues, and what if a colleague, is dealing with mental health issues, or just dealing with something that could be a stressor for them. Just checking in, paying attention to people when they're out of their norm. I know a lot of times with some friends, like before we go to them and kind of unload, we always check in with each other, like, are you okay, before kind of like debrief and talk to you and just make sure you're okay. Or even with some of the fraternity brothers, I have a couple of them, as annoying as they are, they do call and just check in, like, hey, how you doing? Like, what's going on? Anything new? Just checking in with you. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did. And Dan, if you can chime in as well.
Yeah. I would say, just like both of my brothers said, you got to check in with people and really think before you call the police. Like, really think about what you're calling the police for, or what do you think an officer can do to help the situation, instead of make the situation either worse or make the person that you're calling the police on scared, so they don't do anything irrational when we get there. So I would just say, think about what you're calling the police for. If the person is a harm to yourself or others, call the police. If they're just not listening to you, don't call the police. You guys have to be adults about certain things. Some people don't want to listen to you. Not everybody's going to like you and listen to you. And like my brother Dale said, parents, please be parents. As hard as it is, just please be a parent. A lot of parents want to be their kids' friends. You're there to raise them, not be their friend the whole time.
There is one other big thing we forgot to say: custody. If you guys don't have a court paperwork, there's nothing we can do. He's the dad, you're the mom. We cannot take the baby from the mother or the father.
And we kidnap him.
Unless there's paperwork, court paperwork. At normal time, the sheriff would do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's paperwork normally times and they're not giving up to you, when you go to court, make sure you document everything so they can be violated at that point in time.
So you actually bring up a very good point. Okay. So let's run through two situations. So parents are arguing. Dad tries to take the kid. Mom says, hell no, or vice versa. Both are married. Both live in the same household. And they call the police. And the police respond. At this point, if there's no violence, if there's no sign of trauma, it's just an argument. Is there anything an officer can do in that case?
Nope. Whoever has possession of the baby, they're just gonna end up keeping the baby. That's normally how it goes. Most of the time, it's the mother holding the baby in the arms already, so we're not gonna take the baby from the mother, unless there is a danger to the something in the house is causing danger to the baby. And at that point in time, we wouldn't even take the baby. We would just call DSS and stay on scene. So we won't really do anything at all, honestly. Just make sure everything is safe. Everyone is safe.
So, all right, let's flip it. Let's say the parents aren't together and there is a custody order. And so let's say in order, the parents agree to meet at this gas station to do a custody transfer. Dad takes the kid on the weekends, something like that. Let's say parent and the kid do not show up. Is that the time to call the police?
I would say still no, because we can't do anything at that point in time. It's not kidnapping because it is his or her daughter or son. What you have to do is call the sheriff department, verify the document, and when you guys go to court, they'll be violated.
All right, all right. And like I said, we've got a few more questions. So, and again, everyone, I greatly appreciate you guys asking these questions. This is a very important conversation. I've seen situations where the police probably didn't need to be called, but because they were there, one reason or another, the situation escalated. And so again, it's important that we sort of have this understanding here. So this question this is for Brother Gamble. Do you think law enforcement officers need specialized and niche counseling unique to their job based on what they see every day?
You said, do law enforcement need?
Like, basically, do they need, or do you think they need special counseling just off of what they see and experience on a daily basis?
I wouldn't say need. I think it will be beneficial, but I wouldn't say need. Because again, you have some people that are able to cope with certain situations, and like those brothers, they have something, an outlet for them. And then some individuals, they don't. And so maybe that need is there and it could be beneficial.
All right. And this other question is for you. As we know, in the African American community, counseling and therapy is taboo. It's taboo. I can't talk today. To consider, let alone talk about. How do you positively promote mental health counseling and therapy as a way to maintain good sanity through the years of whatever said career you have, or just in general? And I think I want to expand that question to the fellow officers as well. You know, as the question states correctly, you know, mental health has sort of been swept under the rug throughout the years in the Black community, and so for all three of you gentlemen, how do you convince somebody to say you should go to therapy, and that's not a bad thing?
It's difficult, but I think normalizing it. Social media is a big platform where I've been seeing a lot of people post things as far as like, you know, it's okay not to be okay, like seek help or have somebody that you can speak with. And so using platforms, again, checking in with people and just let them know that if you're not okay, like that's okay.
I think that it's definitely a great tool to tell people to get checked out. And also, mental health is a really important thing. It deals a lot with your stress levels, your health wise, like your heart. It deals a lot with a lot of things about you. Mental health is really important. I think more people should definitely go see a therapist, because some people, they have trauma from their childhood that still bothers them in their adult life, and they don't want to accept the fact that they have something wrong with them. But it's okay, because no one's perfect. Even just because me and my brother we're police officers doesn't mean we're perfect human beings. We all have some sort of mental defect that we all can get counseling for, and that you can talk to somebody for. No one's perfect.
Mental health, yes, everybody needs to be seen by somebody, talk to somebody. However, me convincing somebody to do it, it was very hard until I actually did it myself, because I was part of that stigma where I didn't want to go. I kind of knew I needed to go, but my wife kept pushing it for years, so I finally went. And me doing that and having that mindset to actually going, that kind of helped me kind of explain to people about telling me how to go and why you should go, and basically just tell my side of the story.
So just to and first off, I applaud you for ultimately deciding to talk to a counselor. So like this, when you're out in the field and you come across someone who you think would benefit from talking to someone, how often do you, like, what would be your sort of pitch, if you will, to them? Do you do it from a general sense, or do you get a little personal and sort of tell them a little bit of your story?
I do a little personal. I mean, that's the only way I can really truly relate to somebody. I just personal.
I definitely I get on their level because when I go see a psychiatrist now, and it's highly recommended by a lot of supervisors to the police officers to definitely see a psychiatrist. I get on the level and I let them know, hey, this is what I've seen, and being a military veteran, dealing with a lot of veterans that do have PTSD, and I talk to them as well. I'm like, hey, you're not in the right state of mind, and you're definitely putting yourself at risk and your family's life and your personal life at risk because you're hurting them. The reason we're here so no one gets hurt. So I definitely get on a personal level with them and explain to them, hey, this is going to help you. It's going to benefit you. So please do it for the safety of yourself and others, and for the benefit of yourself. It is really good.
And so I think a little bit of what we're talking about here is, of course, the basis of the conversation is when things sort of get on the far end, beyond a person's control. But a lot of it is also playing offense. Knowing your family, knowing your friends, knowing when they're a little off, and just saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And just going from there. And I've known situations where that simple question presented helped prevent a more escalated situation. And then, of course, we all hear in the news of incidents across the country, especially mass shootings, where the suspect had a history of A, B, C, and D, and in some cases they weren't addressed. And so, like everybody is saying, just playing offense and just saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And just knowing when someone's off for whatever reason, and just go from there. And so we have more questions coming in. This is for Brother Gamble. Can an individual not show any signs of mental distress, but be depressed or withdrawn? And if so, can someone untrained recognize that? Or should a professional be the only person to assess what that person is?
Can someone show signs? I would say yes. I was actually having a conversation with a friend about people who are high functioning, suffer from high functioning depression, or just high functioning where they're able to function and live life as you wouldn't think anything's wrong, but they, deep down at night, like they're suffering or going through something. So I would say yes. And I went to therapy last year, and I remember my therapist telling me, like, there are some conversations that's inappropriate to have with your family and friends because you're putting that burden on them. And so you can always be a support for, that support for them, but I would definitely encourage them to seek help if they need it.
Thank you for that. One more question. Do law enforcement officers undergo weekly, monthly, or yearly mental health assessments to ensure that they are mentally sound?
No, I think pretty much the only time really we get evaluated is if there's a use of force, somebody loses their life, or you have too many uses of force back to back. But just besides like it already happening and then they're trying to address it, make sure it doesn't continue to happen, no.
And in my experience, again, being a former crime reporter, in most situations where, like Brother Jackson said, there's a traumatic loss of life, but doesn't always have to be a shooting. It could be a wreck. I've had situations where I was one of the first people on scene of a pretty bad wreck, and I've seen people mangled and banged up really bad, or a situation where a child dies. And again, it doesn't have to be trauma involved. It could have drowned. I've known officers to seek counseling after something like that. But I think most people will think of, or let me ask the question this way: is it like Law and Order? For example, where if you discharge your weapon, you automatically get a psych eval. You have to be cleared by psychiatrists before you get to return to active duty. Like, is that like that in real life?
As far as
Yes.
discharging it at somebody,
Yes.
Right. Like let's say an officer shoots somebody or kills somebody or whatever the case may be. Do they have to be cleared by a psychiatrist first before they return? Of course, following the internal investigation and all of that. Do they have to be cleared by a psychiatrist before they're able to return to active duty?
Yes, you do. You have to be cleared by a psychiatrist after you discharge your weapon from the line of duty. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, we are at questions and we've been talking for exactly an hour. So again, I would like to thank all three of you for taking time to talk to us about when to call law enforcement. And it's a very simple question. And again, there are those obvious situations. When a weapon's involved, when there's a pretty bad wreck, or just something just crazy happens, there's an explosion. But there's a lot of gray. And as you guys heard tonight, officers, social workers, they often work in that gray space. And so it's really good to sort of have that understanding. And each situation is unique. But I'm glad that we were able to present some sort of baseline in terms of when you should contact law enforcement and when you should look at other options. And so some shameless plugs here. Of course, follow us on Facebook as you guys are right now. Don't forget to hit that like button. Also follow us on Instagram, Triangle_Iotas. And of course, our website, triangleiotas.org. This program is part of our overarching Time to Build initiative. And this initiative was born pretty much exactly 1 year ago following the killing of George Floyd. And we felt like we needed to do something, to take action in order to educate people, especially people in Black and Brown communities. And to let you guys know, we received a Social Action Award from the Eastern region of Idaho Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated for this very effort. So definitely congratulations to all of you. Thank you for your support. We can now call this an award-winning program. That's pretty great to hear. But the work has just started. And again, we appreciate everyone's support. And we look forward to sharing sort of our next episode next month. And so again, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, triangleiotas.org. And if you have any questions about, and also this video will be on our website within the next 24 hours. So again, thank you everyone. Have a great evening, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next month.